Mike wasn't supposed to be out that late. His mum had told him to be home before dark, but he'd lost track of time while exploring the woods near his new neighbourhood. He'd moved here just last week, and the forest was his escape, a place to be alone with his thoughts. But now the sun had dipped below the horizon, and a thick fog was curling up from the ground, swallowing up the path he'd come from. As he stumbled through the dimming light, Mike spotted something odd in the mist. Jagged stones jutted up from the earth, clustered together like teeth. It was a graveyard, small, hidden, eerie. The air turned colder, biting at his skin. He shivered and thought about turning back, but something pulled him forward. He stepped into the graveyard, his footsteps muffled by the damp ground. The graves were old, their stones covered in moss and cracked with age. But it was the names on the headstones that made Mike's blood run cold. Harris. The first one read David Harris, the second Margaret Harris, his family's name. He looked around, his eyes darting from one grave to another. Every headstone was marked with his last name. Confused, he tried to convince himself it was a coincidence. Maybe there were other families named Harris in the area, but as he walked deeper into the graveyard, each name felt eerily familiar. Thomas Harris, Jennifer Harris. He knew these names. They were his ancestors, names he'd heard his parents mention, passed down like family legends. But how did they end up here in this strange, forgotten graveyard that didn't exist on any map? Mike's heart pounded as he reached the last row of graves. The fog thickened, pressing in around him. The names on these headstones chilled him to the bone. Michael Harris. The date on the stone was faint, nearly worn away, but he could just make out the year. It was the current year. The day was today. Mike staggered back, his breath coming in sharp gasps. This had to be a prank, some twisted joke. But there was no one else here, only the silence of the graves and the icy grip of dread closing around him. He turned to leave, but the fog was so thick now he couldn't see the path. The way out had vanished. He tried to calm his racing mind, whispering to himself, "It's not real. This can't be real." But when he glanced back at the headstone with his name, he saw something new. Something that hadn't been there before. A shovel, leaning against the grave, as if waiting for him. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he felt compelled to take a step closer. It was as if some unseen force was guiding him, urging him to pick up the shovel. His hands trembled as he wrapped his fingers around the handle. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, like it was alive, calling to him. In a trance, he began digging, dirt flying under his hands. He dug deeper and deeper, his mind blank, consumed by an overwhelming need to see what lay beneath. The smell of damp earth filled his nose, and a dark pit yawned open in the ground. Finally, his shovel struck something solid. He brushed the dirt away with his hands, revealing a wooden coffin. It looked ancient, the wood rotting and cracked, but he couldn't stop himself. He pried it open, and there, lying inside, was himself. Mike gasped, stumbling back as he stared at his own face, pale and still, lying in the coffin. His own lifeless eyes stared back at him, wide open and unseeing. A wave of horror crashed over him, but when he tried to scream, no sound came out. His voice was gone, his body frozen in place. Then he heard a whisper, soft and chilling, drifting up from the coffin. "Welcome home, Mike. You found your place." Before he could move, the fog swirled around him, thick and suffocating. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see. The world spun and the ground seemed to open up beneath him. He fell deeper and deeper into the dark. When the fog lifted, the graveyard was silent once more. Only one new headstone marked the earth, with fresh soil piled beside it. The name on the stone read, Michael Harris.